Okay, so Game of Thrones. This video I'm going to talk about as quickly as I can. The Wall, the Land of Forever Winter, and Norse mythology, because this is one area that I don't actually or haven't seen myself anyone talking about how Norse mythology is entwined with the Game of Thrones and this concept of the Wall and the Land of Forever Winter. So, quick recap: the Wall. First men come over, they have a war with the children of the forest, they make some sort of agreement on the Isle of God's Eye, where they decide who's going to live where. The children get to stay in the forest, the first men get every place else. They agree not to chop down the were tree, and they eventually take on the religion or the faith, I would say, of the children of the forest. But eventually the long night comes, and the really long winter, and the others come down and basically almost wipe out all of men. And eventually this dude Azor Ahai comes. He's like the Messiah with this light sword, and we'll talk about his Arthurian religion relations a little bit later. But they drive him back beyond the wall, and supposedly Bran the Builder builds this wall to keep them out, and the children of the forest imbue it with magic, and so the others stay above the wall. And something like 6,000 or 8,000 years go by, and nobody's ever heard of them. And then suddenly, here comes the others, and the potential that they're going to come down once again, and the long night and the long winter is coming, because everybody keeps saying winter is coming, and they don't just mean the regular old winter. Obviously, it's presaging the long winter that's to come. And so, what I want to talk about here is how this is reflective of Norse mythology. So, first of all, the Land of Forever Winter is almost exactly, in words, the Norse realm, one of the 9 realms of Norse mythology, which is Niflheim. And this is, in fact, the land of always winter. And Niflheim in Norse mythology is occupied by the Jotun, or the giants, the frost giants. And forgive me, I can't pronounce the Nordic word for frost giants, but that's who lives there. And they're described in Nordic mythology as some very tall, maybe even gigantic guys who have pale flesh and blue markings. And also in Niflheim, though, in the farthest northern regions and the coldest, bitterest part of Niflheim is the area called Helheim. And Helheim is the home of the goddess Hel. And that's right, Hel. And in fact, it is the etymology for the later Christian version of hell. But in the Nordic version, Hel presides over the area where all the unheroic dead go. So if you died from disease, famine, or just some stupid Viking trick, you would end up living in Helheim. And the goddess Hel had built there a giant palace, and she built around it some gigantic, tall, and very thick walls to keep the living out, so they couldn't come and get the dead, and to keep the dead in. And in her walls were 6 gigantic and beautiful gates, and it was through these gates that the dead would pass. And once you entered, of course, you didn't come back out, unless you did. Jon Snow. Jon Snow. But anyway, so, and to get to Helheim, you had to cross through Niflheim, or the Land of Forever Winter. And in the Land of Forever Winter were 8 rivers. Don't make me pronounce them, but they're somewhat important, because if you look at the map of Westeros and you look at the land above the wall, and it shows you these rivers that kind of divide up the area, and in some way creates a difficult barrier for people to go north and for the others to come south. And so it's very hard to cross. You just don't cross them, even though they're frozen. And one of the rivers, actually, in in Niflheim, the land of forever winter, is right outside the palace gates, or the wall gates of Helheim. And I can't pronounce its name either. I think it's Joel, but in Nordic language, that means a very loud and crashing river. In fact, it's so loud that in this Nordic mythology, if a living regular man tried to cross this river, it would drive him crazy. And of course, it's very wide and rushing, and you can't just get across it in any way except for this one bridge. And the bridge is guarded by a female warrior who asks anybody who's passing through, what's your business there? And if you give her the right answer, you might actually get by. If you don't, you get sent back. Or possibly she renders you whatever, and you end up in Helheim anyways. So that is one of the representations of the wall and the Nordic legend. So one of the, by the way, heroes who tries to go into Helheim is in fact Hodor. I know, right? But unlike Hodor in the Game of Thrones, Hodor did not get his name from, hold the door. He was actually a son of Odin, as well as his brother Balder, and he was tricked by Loki, the mischief maker, into accidentally killing Balder. And Balder was like Achilles. Balder was supposedly impervious to every weapon. His mother Frigg, Odin's wife, had made him impervious, except to one thing, and that was the mistletoe. She had made every other thing on earth swear to never harm Balder, except for the lowly mistletoe, and Loki gave Hodor a weapon of mistletoe, and Hodor was blind, so he had no damn idea what he was holding in his hands, and he was just doing what everybody else was, which was having fun, shooting projectiles or whatever at Balder, but this one in particular actually killed Balder. And since Balder did not die a heroic death, guess where he went? He went to Helheim. And everybody was really mad, but they were in Asgard. And in Asgard, the gods had this sanctuary rule where you couldn't commit any violence. And so initially, nobody could do anything to Hodor, although there was a lot of people who wanted to kill him. And depending on which stories in Nordic mythology you listen to, either Odin found this giantess and had a child with her who grew up within a day, and then, slaughtered Hodor, and so he ended up in Helheim because he was, it was not heroic. And or Hodor decided to try to go to Helheim and rescue his brother. So in the mythology that has Hodor traveling to Helheim to rescue Balder, he goes through some very deep and dark valleys. So he's on the road to hell. You've probably heard this concept before, the road to hell. And this road to hell goes through deep, dark valleys, and it goes along some very steep cliffs, and it's very dangerous where you might fall off. He eventually gets to the bridge that crosses the river, and the warrior woman says, "What's your business here?" And he says, "I've come to see hell about getting Balder back." And she's like, "Okay, you can pass." It seems kind of strange, but there you go. So he rides up to Hell's palace walls, but he very smartly decides not to go through the gates, because once you pass through the gates, you're dead and you're not coming back. But he is riding Odin's horse Sleipnir, and he spurs his horse to jump super high up in the air, and he jumps over the gates instead of going through them. And so then he goes up to the palace, and he sits down, and he's really shocked to find Balder there, sitting there having dinner with Hel. And one of the reasons it finds this shocking, if you know the story of Hel, she's actually the daughter of Loki and a giantess. And she has two brothers, Jormungandr, the big serpent that circles the world and keeps it together, and Fenrir, the wolf. who's like the bad dude that eventually swallows the sun, but we'll get to that. And Hel herself, like her brothers, is not normal. Hel is described, depending on which story you read, she is either half flesh, half pale white flesh and half blue, or she's half regular flesh and the other half is rotten flesh and bones, sort of like the White Walkers. And he sits down and talks to her, and he's trying to get Balder back, and she tells him that no, Balder can't leave because Hel finds Balder pretty entertaining. He's actually considered very beautiful, and for a chick, who's not all that awesome, would you let him go either? No. But Balder does try to give Hodor some gifts to take back with him, and when he tries to leave, he can't leave with the gifts. And he can't take Balder with him. And so instead of leaving, which he technically probably could because he didn't come there through the normal means, he decides to stay there. And but eventually he and Hodor will get together at the end of Ragnarok, which that's going to be another topic. So there you go. The land of always winter is Niflheim. And the farthest northest reaches, the coldest, bitterest place where the others reside, is Helheim. And that's why they have all the dead, because in Helheim is the unheroic dead. And you see all the pictures of the people with, particularly the starved children or the diseased people that are now the army of the dead for the others. So, and the walls were built to keep the dead in and the living out. And they had to cross rivers. So, and the frost giants lived there. So that is some real inspiration for George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones, the land in the north. And the other aspect that we're going to talk about next is the Norse myth of Ragnarok, which is the apocalypse. Thanks. Hopefully you found this somewhat entertaining, and I'll see you next time.